This is a Vostok Amphibia. It's a Russian-made automatic dive watch. I bought this new last year from Scuba Dude store, which is an online store here in the United States that sells Vostok watches. And this watch is called the Scuba Dude watch because it has a picture of a scuba diver on the dial. The reason that I'm repairing it now is because when I bought this watch last year, it had a couple problems. It was running really fast, and it also had an issue where when you set the time on it, when you screwed the crown back in, sometimes the hands would shift as you screwed it back in, as you can see there, and that makes it very difficult to set the time accurately. I contacted Scuba Dude store after I got it and asked about exchanging it, and they said, don't worry about sending the old one back, we'll just send you a new one. You can keep the old one, which is awesome. Their customer service is really great. The new one they sent me works flawlessly, and I've been holding on to this one ever since then, and I've decided to try to repair it now. I want to take it apart and try to figure out why that is happening, and I suspect something is not aligned correctly in the keyless works. Vostok watches are unusual in the way that the case back comes off, because instead of the entire case back unscrewing like most watches, this one has a retaining ring that you have to unscrew, and then you lift the back off after you unscrew the retaining ring. And the reason for doing this is because this is a diving watch. It's designed to be waterproof to, I think, 200 meters. And this gives a more waterproof design than the ones that have the entire back screwing on. As you can see, there's a really wide gasket under there, much wider than you could put in with a screw-on back. With a screw-on back, you can't have such a wide gasket because it would catch on the back and would bunch up when you tried to tighten it down. With this one, the back doesn't have to turn on the gasket. It just sits down flat on it, and then the retaining ring pushes on the back to push it down against the gasket. And one interesting thing about this is when you take this into the water, when you get into really deep depths, the water pressure actually pushes against the back as well and pushes it tighter against the gasket. Now that we have the back off, we need to get the movement out of the case, and in order to do that, we need to remove the stem. So this has a screw down crown, so we need to unscrew it first. And once it's unscrewed, then you're in the winding position for winding the watch. We want to pull it out to the time setting position before we remove it. Now you'll notice that the crown is wobbly on the end of the stem. That's normal on a Vostok watch, so that's not something that's a problem. Now something I want to do first before we pull this out is I want to take a Sharpie marker and I want to put a little dot on the top of the stem. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to know where to align the stem when I try to put it back in, because these are a pain to get back in if you don't have it perfectly aligned. So you can see I've got a little dot there on top of the stem. To remove the stem, there is a button right there that we need to push down with a little screwdriver. You don't want to use a pointed object to do this. You want to use a flat-headed screwdriver. On some watches, and I don't know if that's true with the Vostok, but on some watches, if you push that button with a pointed object, it can damage the button. So we're going to push it down. And the stem pulls right out. So now we can take the movement out. It'll just drop right out now. There we go. Now if we lift the movement up here, we can take the gasket off. And the next thing we need to do is we need to get the dial off, because this stuff that we're going to work on is on the dial side of the movement. We really want the second hand to stop moving. I tried to release the spring tension on the barrel before we took this apart, and I did, and it still is persisting and running, so I may have to wait until this stops before I can continue, because I don't want to try to pull the hands. We have to pull the hands before we can get the dial off, and I don't want to pull the hands while one of the hands is moving, because there's a risk of damaging either the hand or the stem that it's on. While we're waiting, I want to look at the movement and see how the dial comes off. Okay, I can see there are dial screws in the edge of the movement, and they're partially obscured by this movement holder here, and so we need to get it off, and I believe it's held on by a screw on the other side, and I need to be careful when I pick this up that I don't damage the second hand that's moving around there. But that screw right there, I think, is what holds the movement onto the movement holder, so we need to take that off, and then the movement holder should lift off then. And I may need to take the rotor off in order to get the movement holder as well, because it looks like it overlaps part of it. The second hand has finally stopped moving, so we can go ahead and take the hands off. This dial has a textured surface to it that I want to protect from getting damaged, and I don't want this little Scuba Dude picture being damaged either, so I'm going to slide this paper dial protector underneath the hands here. And push it in all the way to the little hole at the end. And then I'm also going to use a piece of plastic laid over the top of it that will protect the dial even more. And I need to turn this. This is not oriented the right way. The plastic will protect the dial even more while also protecting the hands and keeping them from flying up in the air when we pop them off with the hand levers. So we're going to stick these underneath the hands. There we go. Hopefully we didn't break something. Alright, next thing we need to do is get this movement holder off, and the movement holder is held on by a screw right here. And I believe that I'm also going to have to take off the rotor to get the movement holder off, because I think the rotor is overhanging it too far. But we'll see once we take off the screw that holds the movement holder in place. Okay, I've extracted the movement holder screw. Let's see if this thing's going to come off now. Yeah, it comes out through the front of the movement holder, and it looks like the rotor is going to be in the way, so I'm going to have to take off the rotor screw, and that's just that big center screw there. Now with the rotor screw off, the rotor has kind of fallen off, and it looks like the movement holder is about to come off too. And there we go. There's our movement. So now we need to get the dial off, and the dial is held on by a couple of dial screws. There's one right there, and there should be one on the other side somewhere. Yeah, there it is. There's one more. So we'll go ahead and take those off, and the dial should lift off. I've loosened the dial screws enough that we should be able to take the dial off, so it should just lift right off here. There we go. There's the dial side of the movement. This has got a date function, so there's a date wheel here that we're going to have to try to figure out how to remove too to get to the keyless works. One thing I like about this movement is that the dial screws on this are not sunk into deep holes in the sides of the movement like on most movements. That makes them hard to reach, and it makes the heads of them very small. This one has the head sticking out from the side of the movement and has much larger heads that are easier to reach with a screwdriver and much easier to unscrew. So this is a much nicer design in many ways than the Swiss and Japanese watches I've worked on. I've never worked on a watch that had a date wheel before, so I'm trying to figure out how to get it off, and I believe it's held in place by this big plate right here. There's 3 screws that hold it in place. We need to take off, and I think it should come off because there's little teeth on the date wheel here that you can see the gears interact with to flip it to the next date. And they're kind of slightly hidden underneath this platform, so I think that's holding it in place. If it's not what's holding it in place, then it'll reveal what is, because it still has to come off in order to get the wheel off since it overlaps those teeth. I've removed the 3 retaining screws. There's one right here, one right here, and one right here. Here, and here is where we're at. Now, we should be able to lift this right off. Now, it looks like the date wheel is loosened up too. So I think that was right, that is what held that in place. Yeah, and there it is. There's our date wheel. It can come right off. I don't want to pick that up with the tweezers and scratch it, so I'll just do it this way. And there we go. There is the dial side of our movement. Now we can see the keyless works and all that. What I'm going to need to do now is put the stem back in. And I've got this in a movement holder to make it easier to work on, but I think I'm going to have to turn it in the movement holder to get to the stem location, because I think the stem goes in right there. I had to turn the movement back over before I can put the stem in, because we needed to see the dot that I put on the stem when we took it out has to face upward in relation to the back side of the movement when we stick it in. And actually there is a part that fell out when I flipped this over. It needs to go back into the keyless works, and that's the the winding pinion fell out, and that has to be in there for this to function correctly. Now the stem's not wanting to push in, even though I've got the dot aligned, and I think it's because I need to push the button. I need to push the release button that we released it with earlier. There we go, now it's in. And I needed this back in so that I can pull it in and out and see how the keyless works functions. This stem sticks out really far from the movement because the movement is a lot smaller than the case of the watch. That's why I had that big movement holder in there. Okay, now it's in the winding position. I've wound it a little bit now the mechanism's running. I can see the pallet fork moving. When we pull it out further, it should go into a time setting, which is, there it is. Now we push it back in. See, now it's working. It's not giving the problem I was having when it was in the case. When it's pushed all the way, when it's pushed in, I wonder if the case is somehow keeping it from going all the way in when it's being pushed in to screw down the crown. Like maybe the stem isn't quite long enough or something. Because right now everything's working the way it should. Pull it out for time setting. Push in for winding mode. And when it's not turning the setting stuff when it's pushed in like it is when it's in the case. So I would think that maybe our stem is a little too short, and it's not going in all the way when it's cased up in the watch case. I may have to pull the stem on one of my other Vostoks and see how it compares to this one as far as its size. If that's the case, then I may not be able to really do anything with this because there's no parts available for these things in the United States. I took the crown and stem out of my other copy of this watch, the one that works perfectly, because I suspected that the one in the bad one was a slightly different length than the one in the good one, and that was causing the problems. And I believe that is the case because the stem that I took out of the good one is slightly longer than the stem that I took out of the bad one. And I think what's happening is that the one that's not working right, the stem isn't sticking in far enough to push the mechanism in the keyless works to where it pushes the clutch up against the winding mechanism hard enough until it's all the way down. And so that's what's causing that slight amount of engagement with the motion works, which is what moves the hands when you're setting the watch. And unfortunately, there's no way for me to fix that without getting a new part because you can't lengthen a stem that's too short. So we're kind of stuck with that. Instead of just putting the watch back together right now, I think what I'm going to do with this, because I've got it partially disassembled, I've never done a full service on an automatic watch or a watch that has a calendar system like this one has. And so I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to completely disassemble the watch, finish taking it apart, and then I'm going to perform a full service on it and then put it back together. It'll still have the issue with the keyless works where when we screw down the crown, the hands sometimes slightly move. There's nothing I can do about that until I get a new stem and crown for it. But I want to do the complete overhaul on it, even though it's a fairly new watch, just to get the practice of doing that on a more modern watch that has the complications of a date system and an automatic winding system, because that's something I've wanted to try, but I don't want to do that on an expensive Swiss watch or even a Japanese watch and risk messing something up on it. If I screw up on this watch, I've got another copy of it just like it that works perfectly, and it's a watch that only costs $100 new. So I think we're going to do that. That'll be a good experience for me, and it'll be interesting because there's not a lot of information on the web about servicing Vostok watches. So this will be a good addition to our store of knowledge. So our next step is going to be to put the movement back into a movement holder, and I'm going to finish disassembling the keyless works. And then once we do that, then we can flip it over and disassemble the rest of the mechanism. First thing we need to do is get off the hour wheel. And then we need to take off this little gear here too, which connects the hour wheel to the time setting wheel, or the date setting wheel. That's what this wheel here is. This sets the date. There's a little pin sticking up in it, and each time that it turns around once every 24 hours. That pin catches the date wheel and flips it to the next date. Now the next thing we're going to take off is the set bridge, which is this right here. It covers up some of the gears and stuff on the keyless works and provides the detent spring. I've got the set bridge removed. Now we need to take off next. There's two intermediate wheels. There's one right here, which is the that's actually the minute wheel, not the intermediate wheel. The minute wheel and then the intermediate wheel, we need to take those out, and those should just lift out. And then we'll need to take off the yoke spring right here, which curves around here and then goes along the back of the yoke, and then the yoke itself, and then we can get out the clutch. The winding pinion's already out. It goes in here, but it fell out when we flipped the movement over. After we get all these things out, then we can remove the cannon pinion. That was kind of a hard one to get out. That gear looks very thin. There's the intermediate wheel. And then the yoke spring, I think I'm going to take off camera so I don't have that thing ping across the room when it pops off. All right, I've loosened the yoke spring so I can go ahead and pick it up. Oh, it popped off anyway, but it's on the table, so at least we didn't lose it. Now we can take the yoke out. There we go. Now we can take the clutch out. Now I can't take the cannon pinion off right now. The movement has started moving again. The watch is running. It's still got a little bit of power reserve in the mainspring, so I'm gonna wait for that to wind down before we take any more of that apart. One thing that I can take out now is I can take off the wheel here for the Calender works. So we'll go ahead and do that. I loosened the screw for the Calender works wheel. We'll take that off. And lift the wheel out. And there's some other stuff underneath here too that I'm not sure what that is. This is my first time disassembling one with a Calender system. We also need to remove the detent lever here, and it just sits on this pen. Unlike the earlier watches I worked on that were screwed in, but they had a screwed in detent lever, this one just sits on a pen since the set bridge sits on top of it and holds it in place. This lifts off. This is the pen that flips the Calender works to the next date when it comes around to the 12 o'clock position. This, I believe, is just a spring that gives tension to it. We can take that off with a single screw there. All right, I've loosened the screw, and we'll go and take it out. And then we'll take out this little brass spring here. And that is everything on the dial side of the movements is disassembled except for two things. We need to remove the cannon pinion, and we need to remove this lower cap jewel for the balance wheel. And I can't do either of those while the watch is still running, so I'm going to wait for the watch to stop running for it to run out of power in the mainspring. And then we can do those two things and flip the movement over and then start disassembling the drivetrain and the escapement. I flipped the movement over. We need to get this bridge here off so that we can get to the train wheels, but first we need to remove these two brass gears there, and those are the reversing wheels. They're part of the automatic winding mechanism. And those are held on by that little brass spring with a screw. So I'm going to take that off first and remove those, and then we can take out the screws that hold this bridge in and remove it as well. I've got the screw taken out of the little spring here, so we can remove that. Now we can lift out the reversing wheels. Those look like they sit on little posts in there. I want to be careful not to damage the wheels because they're made out of softer copper or brass when I'm using these stainless steel tweezers, but they're not wanting to come out of here very well. Okay, I got it off. I had to work it a little bit to get it off. I already loosened the screws that hold this bridge on. There's three of them on there. One of them fell out already. Then the other two I can lift out with the tweezers. There's the automatic works bridge. And now we have, that'll be the ratchet wheel, the click, and the ratchet, or the crown wheel, the click, and the ratchet wheel. These, I think, are part of the automatic winding mechanism because the reversing gears connect to these and turn this to turn the ratchet wheel. So let's go ahead and lift those out of there now. I've loosened the screw for the ratchet wheel, the click, and the crown wheel, so we can take them out. The crown wheel screw, like on other watches, is a left-handed screw, so you have to turn it clockwise to unscrew it and counterclockwise to tighten it. That's the opposite of a normal screw, so that's something you always have to remember with crown wheel screws. They're almost always made that way. If you try to turn it the wrong direction, you'll strip out the threads on it. Okay, there we go. I had to pop that up. And right back down it goes. There's the click. And the click spring just sits right in there. Oh, it popped out and flew away as soon as I touched it. Okay, now I can't take the barrel bridge off yet because part of it extends underneath this wheel here, which I think is the third wheel. So we need to take off the train bridge. And the train bridge only has one screw up here, which is unusual for a train bridge. But there's another screw sticking up right here that looks like it screws in from the other side of the movement. I may have to take that off to get the train bridge off too, so I need to flip the movement over and see what that screw goes to. I decided to go ahead and take the train bridge off before we do the cannon pinion because the post that the second hand rides on goes through the middle of the cannon pinion, and I don't want to risk bending it when I pull the cannon pinion off. And to get to that, we have to do it from the side. So I know the center wheel we can't take out without removing the cannon pinion, but I think we can get out this one. I believe is the one that the second hand rides on. No, that one's too short. That must be the third wheel. Okay, it looks like I'm going to have to take off the barrel bridge to get to this one. This is the one I wanted to get, I believe, because it goes underneath that. This would be the fourth wheel. And then let's see if we can get the escape wheel out from underneath the balance. There we go. So let's go ahead and take out the screws that hold the barrel bridge on. And that just lifts right off. And this, I believe, is the one that carries the second hand. Something here just fell out of the movement. I'm not sure where that came out of. So I'm going to need to review the video and see where that was at. Because I picked the movement up and that fell out of there, so I don't know what that is for. I think I'm going to have to pull the cannon pinion to get that, though. I figured out what our mystery part is. This is actually something that goes on the bottom of the barrel bridge, and the crown wheel screws into it. It's a separate bushing for that purpose. On most watches, the crown wheel just screws into the barrel bridge. On this one, it has this bushing, so that's what that is. Now, I need to pull the cannon pinion, and before I do that, I'm going to pull this little wheel right here, which is part of the automatic winding mechanism. That way it doesn't fall out when we pick the movement up, turn it over. There we go. Now I'm going to turn the movement over and take the cannon pinion off. Here's the cannon pinion. We're going to put the pin vise over the cannon pinion. tighten it down. And then we're just going to gently pull it off as straight as we can so we don't bend that other post. There we go. Now it's off. Oh, something fell out in my hand here. What is this? Okay, that's the barrel bridge has come out. Or the barrel has come out, I mean. Now, let's see if we can get this wheel to come off now. The one that wouldn't come out before. This is an interesting design. The spindle that the second hand rides on is stuck through the middle of the fourth wheel here, or the center wheel here. And it didn't come out when it came out as a unit with the two of them together. I'm going to see if I can separate those so that I can clean it. Here's the mainspring barrel, which fell out a minute ago when I was taking out the cannon pinion. This is pretty similar to that in every other watch we've worked on. Here's the bottom of it, which has the lid and the top of it. I'm not going to open this like I do normally because this mainspring does not need replaced. There's nothing wrong with it. I bought this watch new about 9 months ago, so it's practically a new mainspring, and there's no reason to open this up and risk damaging it, so I just wanted to show you what the barrel looks like. The only thing we have to do now on this movement is we need to remove the cap jewels from the balance jewels, and there's the one here in the balance cock, and then there's another one on the bottom of the movement, on the movement base plate. These are unusual because they're not like the ankle block settings used on a lot of Swiss watches. This has a spring with 3 little tines that stick in here, and as you rotate the spring, they get released when they come to an opening. So I'm going to have to stick tweezers in there and carefully rotate that to get it out. And the same procedure will have to be done on the one on the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the upper one first, and then I'm going to remove the balance cock and balance wheel. And then underneath the balance wheel is the pallet fork and the pallet bridge. I'll take those out then. And then finally we'll flip the movement over and take off the bottom cap jewel, and that will be the last thing that has to be removed. And the movement will be completely disassembled, and it'll be ready for us to clean the parts. I got it off, and it actually came off pretty easily, but I put the movement inside this plastic bag and did the manipulation from the outside of the bag so I wouldn't lose the part if it came springing off, and it did. It flew off the movement, and it's somewhere in the bag, so I need to find it in there. Alright, we've got the cap jewel spring off. I'm going to extract the chaton with the jewels with this thing called a jewel picker, and it's basically a sticky piece of plastic in a handle that's used for picking out jewels. And it's much easier to use than trying to use a pair of tweezers, and of course it just fell off there into the area under the balance cock. That doesn't normally happen. So I'm going to go ahead and take off the balance wheel so we can get to that. And I've already loosened the screw on it, so I just need to take it off. Oh, there's a shim under there too. We need to make sure not to lose that little shim, because the balance won't go back together correctly without that. Now we can pick up our errant jewel and deposit it in the parts tray. These jewel pickers are really nice for this. They're so much easier to pick up these jewels with than using tweezers, because they tend to ping off the tweezers very easily, and they usually don't fall off the jewel picker like it just did here. Now the last thing we need to do on this side of the movement is take off the pallet fork bridge and then the pallet fork. Looks like we have 2 more shims that fell out of there, so there must have been 3 of them stacked together to make that pallet fork be properly aligned, so I'm going to pick those up, make sure we don't lose those. I'm sorry about the background noise. My air conditioner is running almost continuously because of the heat right now, and it only gives me about 5 minutes at a time between the times when it's running, when I don't have that noise to work. And since we're almost done, I just want to go ahead and get this finished. I've got the screw taken out of the pallet fork bridge, and so let's go ahead and remove it. And then we can lift out the pallet fork, which is kind of falling down there, it looks like. Okay. The only thing left to do on this movement is to take off the lower balance jewels, which are on the other side of the movement base plate. And you can see that right there. And I'll take that off the same way I did the one on the balance cock. I'll put it inside a plastic bag, and then I'll use the tips of the tweezers to rotate this until all 3 tines come out of the groove that they go into, and then it'll probably fly up out of the movement like it did from the one on the balance cock. And that's what the plastic bag did. It caught it and kept me from losing it. And then I can lift out that jewel with the jewel picker, just like we did the one on the balance cock. So I'll go ahead and do that off camera, since we've already seen that procedure for the upper one. And the next step is going to be to clean all the movement parts. And I'm not going to show the cleaning process, because the cleaning process is the same for virtually all watches. I have my cleaning video that you can watch if you're interested in seeing the cleaning procedure for a watch movement, and I'll put a link to that in the description. The next video that you'll see will be the one where we start to reassemble it after I get done cleaning it.